We open to a view of Paris being demoted to ensign, so I already have a high opinion of this episode. He's also going to be spending the next 30 days in solitary confinement, though after spending the last 4 years cooped up with the same handful of people, some would see that as more of a reward than a punishment. Sometime later, he receives a visit from Neelix, or more accurately, Neelix is briefly in the same room as him. Paris isn't permitted any social interaction, so Neelix drops off a computer tablet and some low-quality food, in this case Leola root stew. As an aside, if the hydroponics bay is capable of growing plants from many of the planets we've visited, why is it still pumping out Leola root, a food universally despised by the entire crew? I'd have expected someone to vent all viable plantings of it from an airlock the moment we had an alternative. Neelix buggers off and Paris has a play with that tablet. Hello, this could be interesting. He's using it to record a letter to his father, an overbearing bellend of an admiral, and the person we've previously hinted at being the root cause of Paris's dickishness. Sadly, it looks like we aren't going to delve into that history, not immediately anyway, as Paris is instead using the letter to explain why he's in jail again. Flashback time, and Paris is being Captain Proton. He's joined by sidekick Kim as before, but this time also with the previously mentioned but never seen Delaney sisters. Despite being the one who'd always wanted this double date, Paris makes no romantic overtures, probably because B'Elanna would rip his cock off, but Kim's decided he's now into one of them after resisting any suggestion of the sort in the past. Poor Libby. A call to the bridge ends their fun with news that we found something interesting. The something turns out to be a ball of water in space, not ice, but water, and flowing too, with scans showing it has flora and fauna in it. We appear to have found a spacefaring ocean. Kim tells us that it looks like it's being held together via artificial means with science field bobbins, and perhaps that's related to the 3 craft that breach the surface and approach Voyager. Janeway calls to say hi, and they respond by pooping at us. Bit rude. Janeway tries again, attempting to assure them that we have no hostile intent. There's no response, so in order to prove that we're not hostile, we poop yellow at them and knock out the weapons on their lead ship. Perhaps shooting is their way of saying hi, as they've now decided they want to chat after all. The guy who calls us has an air of the cetacean about him, and he explains he's a deputy consul from the Manean Maritime Sovereignty, presumably referring to the ball of wet we've found. Consul Flipper's wary of us, but calms a bit after Janeway explains we're explorers and just curious. After a touch more convincing, perhaps helped by the fact that we've got bigger guns than them, Flipper agrees to come over to Voyager with some mates. The tour takes us all to the bridge, where Flipper gets chatting with Paris, and from which we learn that Flipper's already nomadic people found the water in space a few hundred years ago and moved in. Paris's interest in the newcomers is noted by Janeway, and she invites him to join the party in her briefing room. Happily, Janeway proves as curious about the ocean as I am, asking if they know how it was created. Thanks, Kathy. Consul Flipper hands the question to an underling, who explains they're not entirely sure. A religious faction of their people says it was a divine gift, but he thinks it formed naturally. Their lack of a true understanding has proven to be a bit of a problem, though. See, the ocean is shrinking. Whatever was keeping it together isn't working as well as it used to, and bits of it are floating off into space. Left unresolved for too long, there won't be much of an ocean left. Even worse, they're helpless as they can't go deep enough into the core to find out what's happening, the pressure being too much for their craft to survive. Paris offers them a lift as that's something we can handle, though a look from Janeway suggests clearing it with her first might have been a better idea. Thankfully, he's in luck. She's interested in his enthusiasm, and he explains his fascination with sailing over a pot of tea. I assume it's tea anyway. If she's making coffee in a teapot, then cultural stereotypes require me to take that more seriously than the time she murdered a guy. I know I've already let Tuvok get away with it once, but that was before replicators, so maybe a coffee pot was all he had. Anywho, Paris tells her he's always been interested in sailing and wanted to follow that path, but was overruled by his arsehole dad, the Starfleet Admiral, who insisted he'd serve only aboard a spacecraft. But now he has the chance to do both, and tells Janeway that some minor tweaks to the Delta Flyer would make it viable for the journey. We built it to withstand the pressure of gas giants, after all. Janeway agrees, so it looks like we're going diving. Paris has roped Kim and Seven into coming, and Flipper's underling will be joining us too. We dive in and go to see what this maritime sovereignty is all about. We find lots of buildings that are both big and shiny, though we're told this is purely industrial as they live on their ships. Back on Voyager, Janeway's been doing some science, and the results are worrying. She tells Consul Flipper that the containment problem is worse than his underling thought, and this ocean's got maybe 5 years before it all turns to shit. He doesn't much fancy being the bearer of bad news, and decides to wait until the Delta Flyer's back, just in case they find a solution. What they've actually found are some science wibblies, and we go to take a look. They're coming from a structure that's creating a whole lot of gravity, presumably the force keeping the ocean together. Maybe it's also stopping it from freezing, too. It's also proper old, with Kim saying at least 100,000 years. Tangentially, that's the same rough guess we used on the communications array that the Hirogen claimed as theirs. I wonder if that's a deliberate connection, or just due to writers liking round numbers. Flipper's underling tells us his people have no records of a previous inhabitant for the ocean. I imagine their religious leaders aren't going to be too chuffed about this discovery, but we'll worry about that later. For now, Underling thinks a malfunction here could be the cause of their problems, so we set up a link and start downloading data from a computer that seems to be controlling it. A bit of shaking heralds the arrival of something with other ideas, and a look out of the window shows it to be a sea beastie. The space Kraken rams us, which would be bad enough even without the massive electrical shock it spat out when it connected. A console shits out sparks and shields go offline, so Kim thinks we should probably take the hint and fuck off. Another ram knocks out propulsion, removing that option, so Seven poops at the bastard until it scarpers, but not before it leaves us with a leak. We return to the present, where Paris is still dictating the story in his letter. He's rudely interrupted by Voyager coming under attack, shouts to the guard that he should be allowed to fly the ship go ignored, and a bit of shaking knocks him first into a wall and then onto his arse for a nap. A little later, he's being treated by the doc and told that they were attacked by 5 ships, but managed to leg it thanks to the brilliant flying of Paris's replacement. It's good to see the doc doesn't extend the concept of do no harm to Paris's ego. Requests for a more thorough medical check in sickbay are dismissed by the doc, and he cheerfully bids Paris farewell for the next 20 days. With nothing else to do, he might as well continue that letter of his, and we return to the flashback. Paris is fixing the leak by pooping blue at it. We still have no shields, communication, or propulsion, but we can blow shit up if we want, so that's nice. Seven thinks they can escape by jettisoning anything not bolted down and then floating to the surface. Paris isn't ready to give up yet, though, and wants to stay and keep trying. He says they'll only get one shot at fixing this installation, though doesn't bother to explain why. The others don't seem to question why they can't simply come back again either, instead agreeing to stay. Kim says they still have a connection with the computer on that gravity generator, presumably using a different transmitter to the one in the broken communications system. It's somewhere to start at least, and they get to work. Things aren't going well on the surface either. The ocean's decided to take a big space piss as the field keeping it all together is having a bit of a wobble. Voyager tries to reinforce it while calls to the Delta Flyer go unanswered, causing Consul Flipper to panic about how he's going to explain all of this. Janeway diplomatically tells him to shut the fuck up. We switch back to the Flyer to find that they're having a bit of a shake. The gravity generator's throwing out unstable science wibblies, and we learn that this is because it's using most of its power to reinforce its own structure. Kim believes the reason for this is because the mass of what it's holding has been slowly increasing, something that you'd see happen if, say, an alien species moved in and started building lots of shit. Without reinforcing itself, it would be crushed, but Kim says that's leaving it with insufficient power to hold all of the water and the stuff in it. Paris suggests transferring the power back, an idea which, well, it seems to have a pretty obvious flaw to me, but let's see where this is going. Seven says it'll work, but be a temporary solution, explaining neither of those conclusions. Nobody else seems to have an issue with the plan, so we do it. Maybe it'll give us the time to figure out a permanent solution, or at least the chance to bugger off and leave the problem with our new friends, not our circus, not our monkeys. Or fish, in this case, I guess. Voyager watches as the giant space piss splashes back down again, but not because of their efforts. Consul Flipper is relieved and eyes a promotion as Chakotay detects the Delta Flyer slowly rising to the surface. As the Delta floater ascends, Paris is showing Flipper's underling some data they got from the gravity generator. Apparently this ocean used to be on a planet, and the aliens who made the generator scooped it all up. Maybe it was to avoid a disaster, maybe it was sentimental or religious, maybe they were just fucking about. Either way, they were very good at what they did and built their tech to last. Paris has had a closer look at the science and now believes the containment failures aren't a result of the generator. He thinks it's because of the maritime sovereignty's industrial operations. He doesn't explain why, but he looks very sure of himself, and Flipper's underling doesn't question it, so I guess we won't either. We're back in the brig, and Paris is woken from a bad dream by Kim. Janeway's permitted him a visitor, and we could draw some very interesting conclusions from it being Kim instead of B'Elanna. Paris manages to turn the visit into an argument about the letter he's recording, and Kim leaves, but not before he tells Paris that he should finish it. He must have listened, as we're flashback-bound once more. Once the Delta Flyer is back aboard, we hold a meeting with Consul Flipper and his friends, telling them about our findings. He says he'll pass it along, but it's all very hand-wavy and non-committal. Paris presses the issue, suggesting they plan to do nothing. It ends in a ding-dong where Consul Flipper uses the logical fallacy of Paris's opinions being irrelevant because he's not a native, and he stomps off to be all proudly patriotic about the thing he's destroying through willful ignorance. Janeway's not impressed about Paris's intervention. She agrees they're making a fuck-up, but it's their fuck-up to make. We've done what we can to open their eyes, and now we're going to move on. Paris is pissy, but knows not to push it. Instead, he's moping about on the holodeck until B'Elanna finds him. He's wallowing in the despair of it all, believing that he can do nothing. B'Elanna's not so sure, and gently nudges him towards the same conclusion. Flipper's underling is leaving, until Paris stops him in the teleporter room, that is, and tells the guy operating it to sod off. Underling confirms what Paris believes, that Flipper and the leaders won't instigate any real change. The only way that would happen is if those industries went offline, then they'd probably be rebuilt using the more ecologically friendly tech we've given them. It would make no sense to rebuild the shit versions again, after all. Underling is on board with Paris's hints, and we go off to do a bit of the old eco-terrorism. Up on the bridge, Tuvok is telling Janeway that the Delta Flyer just took off without authorization. Good to see he's fixed all of those security holes Janeway told him to overhaul a couple of seasons ago, back when she got tired of shuttles getting nicked every other week. Paris isn't answering calls, and they're already too far away to be grabbed with a tractor beam. Consul Flipper gives Voyager a call to ask what the flying fuck we're playing at, forcing Janeway to tell him that Paris is acting without orders, and Flipper's underling seems to be along for the ride too. Oh, and they're probably going to blow shit up. The maritime sovereignty takes issue with this, and 3 ships express their displeasure by farting some shiny balls at the Delta Flyer. Paris outruns them, though the creaking of the ship suggests this plan is not without risk. Janeway calls and tells Paris to stop being a dick. He declines and hangs up, so she looks at options for shooting him instead. Phasers won't do it, but we can fart a firework out as a depth charge. Janeway gives him another chance to stop, which he ignores, so she orders Tuvok to fire, but not until waiting for Paris to do the same at those industrial buildings for some reason. Voyager's firework intercepts the one from the Delta Flyer, which means either we have very fast fireworks or they have very slow ones. The explosion also disables the Delta Flyer, somehow, which is very handy indeed, and we shouldn't question it at all. We've scooped up the Delta Flyer and set off for the Alpha Quadrant once more. All that remains is Paris's disciplinary procedure. He still feels that he was right, and at least he was a dick for a good reason this time. Good reasons don't change the insubordination, though, and she demotes him and sentences him to 30 days solitary. 30 days later, Tuvok comes to release him. It's time to get back to work, he says, but suggests a shave first. If that's 30 days worth of growth, and as someone who dislikes shaving, I confess I'm a little jealous. A smooth and uniformed Paris receives a call from B'Elanna, who orders him to report for dinner in her quarters later, though sets it for 7 in the morning. Maybe they're both on night shift. Before leaving his quarters, Paris finishes up the letter and saves it, telling the computer to transmit it if we ever get within range of Earth, as we fly away. I wanted to like this one, as the dickishness of Paris is something I felt we need to explore more for a while, but the flaws drag it down. Some of the writing certainly doesn't help. Take that gravity generator. We say the power is mostly being used for reinforcing the structure, but are able to transfer it without issue. Why? And why is that only a temporary solution? There's no mention that this procedure is harmful to the tech, so we're given no reason to not continue in that regard, especially as we gave them the means to visit the installation at will for future tinkering. Later on, Flipper's underling suggests it's not the installations, but the extraction of oxygen itself that's causing the problem by saying it's dangerously high. How does removing a component of the water increase mass? Or are we now saying that this is the cause by affecting the generator in a different way? We're never told. It all feels a bit slapdash, as though pages from two different drafts of the script got mixed together, and that harms overall cohesion of the story. The shot at the end is complete and utter shite too. Voyager can fire from orbit and get 2 kilometers under the surface before the Delta Flyer, a ship with upgraded Borg tech weapons, can hit the thing sitting in front of them. Do fuck off. And the explosion is sufficient to disable the flyer without causing damage to the industrial complex of a lower tech species to boot. We've talked some bollocks on Voyager before, but that ranks pretty high on the list. With that out of the way, let's look at the potentially interesting bits about Paris in here. When Janeway agrees to the mission, we see happy Paris. Not smug happy, not smirk happy, not misdirection happy, but genuinely happy. Janeway's giving him chance to explore a childhood dream, and, for the briefest moment, we get a look at the Paris he could have been if he hadn't been written as a complete dick. Compare his reaction here to the worry then relief he showed when being told he could run a test flight in Threshold. He wanted that to fulfill the expectations of others, to remove a weight. But he wanted this purely for himself. I've said a few times now that Paris is a potentially likeable character wrapped up in an arsehole, and we should give credit to Robert Duncan McNeill for being able to do both. Elsewhere, using a child version of Paris in the dream sequence where he hears the voice of his father and Janeway raises some questions. Are we implying that this is how Paris sees himself, or is this just the age he most associates with the trauma of being a disappointment to authority figures? Does he view the disappointment from Janeway in the same manner as that of his father? Conflating her with a maternal role raises some unpleasant questions about lizard babies, so let's move on. Why don't we end with B'Elanna? She said she was proud of Paris, and perhaps that's because him finding a cause is doubly important to her. It's another indicator of his maturing, of course, caring about something else beyond himself, but perhaps it strikes a more personal chord, too. He's taking on a desire to fight for something that's right, even though it might not be welcome or legal. His actions here have a direct comparison with her and the Marquis, even down to the use of physical force and terrible odds. I imagine seeing such an unexpected alignment of values is a pleasing surprise to her. End of episode.
I don't understand.
None of us do, it just is.
But it doesn't make any sense. I'm a being of science. I look for answers. This is entirely illogical.
We've all been trying to figure it out for millennia. Nobody's managed it yet. I just thought you might have a unique perspective on it, you know, and an objectivity that organics lack or some shite.
I've personally analyzed tens of thousands of compounds. My database stores millions more. Among all of them, I can find nothing that comes even close to being so utterly repulsive as one I just tasted.
Yeah, I can believe that.
And yet, despite this, I can already feel the desire to do it again.
Fucking weird, innit? It's like an itch, but in your brain. Do you want me to bring back the curtain?
Yes, please. Woof.